Hello there, TimeShift. We'll be talking about that after I say thank you for almost 50 subscribers at the time of recording. Woo! Okay, now that that's out of the way, TimeShift is one of many games that I remember playing the demo for a few years after it released. And it's similar to other games from the Xbox 360 and PS3 era like Wolfenstein 2010, Turok 2008, and maybe even something like The Saboteur, in that it's kind of been forgotten by time. But I at least remember it, so maybe that's worth something, I don't know. Anyways, I wanted to look at this game and see if it's a hidden gem of the Xbox 360's catalog, or if maybe it's okay for it to be forgotten. Let's look at some gameplay and dig into TimeShift. TimeShift was released in 2007 for Microsoft Windows, PlayStation 3, and of course, the Xbox 360. The game was developed by Saber Interactive and supposedly published by Vivendi, though I've seen a bunch of other companies listed online and it says Sierra on the box, so take that with a grain of salt, I guess. Graphically, I'd say TimeShift actually looks pretty good when compared to other games that came out in 2007. It's nothing too incredible or jaw-dropping, but it's nicely stylized, and for me at least, there's something very nostalgic about the visuals of early 360 titles like this. I also think that the atmosphere was handled nicely with good sound design and voice acting for the most part. Like many games from this period, TimeShift is quite gritty, and I think that the visuals and presentation get that across nicely. I will say though that the opening few levels are a lot more visually appealing to me than most of the other sections in the game. I just feel like the dark and rainy setting of the opening portion fits the art style of the game better, and also I just kinda like the way it looks better. At the same time though, I really enjoyed how the setting changed in almost every level, just for the added visual variety. It would most definitely get boring if every section of the game took place in a dingy, rainy, shitty city. If you're like me, which I guess is pretty unlikely, one of the first things you might notice in these first stages is how similar the intro is to Half-Life 2. I mean, the oppression and destruction is a little more obvious here.
Beg, hear me? Beg for your life!
But they literally have an antagonist on a giant monitor and loudspeaker just like Dr. Brain in Half-Life 2. Honestly, I think the similarities to Half-Life 2 are kinda what drew me to this game in the first place, so I might be a little bit biased. And I mean, at least they decided to copy Half-Life 2 and not like Drake of the 99 Dragons or something. On a more positive and less unoriginal note, this game does have some attention to detail during combat that I think is worth mentioning, with some minor destructible environments like Fear and some interesting enemy interactions, also like Fear. You can shoot the weapons out of enemies' hands, knock them on the ground, and sometimes they'll even stay on the ground to shoot at you, which I thought was pretty cool. I also liked how the enemies comment on things like when you slow down time, steal a weapon from them, or whenever they just discuss their tactics. I would say the presentation in this game holds up fairly well, considering how old the game is, with the possible exception of the character models, which look okay until you get close to them. Also, the sound effect for this giant wind turbine is like a 2-second loop. Just throwing that out there. Earlier I mentioned how the intro to this game was similar to Half-Life 2. TimeShift is just missing the part where there's actual character development, exposition, and shit that makes sense. There is a brief intro cutscene that does set things up okay, but after that there's really nothing else to complicate the narrative. Essentially, the character you play as is a scientist who works for a company that's developing suits that allow for time travel. Well, one of the other scientists named Dr. Crone, I guess, is not a great guy and decides to hijack one of the suits, travel back to an undisclosed point in time, and appoint himself as an evil dictator, leading the main character to travel back in time in the other suit to try and stop him. That's all well and good, but like I said before, that's pretty much the whole story. I'm okay with simplistic stories, especially in games like this where the emphasis is really on the action. But there's just nothing here to analyze. There's no motivations for the characters, there's hardly any characters to begin with, and oftentimes there's no obvious reasons for the stuff you're doing in-game. Take the antagonist, for example. The only reason I could come up with for why this Crone guy is bad is maybe that they named that bowel disease after him. Seriously though, he's just evil and that's all there is to it. Probably the stupidest thing about the story though is these weird 5-second cutscenes that play at the most random times in the game.
It's not what his notes say that concerns us. It's how they're phrased. Like fact, not theory. Like he has already made a jump.
That was sus.
They don't relate at all to what's going on story-wise, and they're not formatted like flashbacks. It just kinda seems like some troll at Saber Interactive jumbled up clips from all the cutscenes all over the game right before it was released or something. The clips are only a few seconds long, but it just makes me wonder why they're here at all. It's like vacuuming a whole carpet, but leaving a few small but noticeable piles of dust and shit on the ground for no specific reason other than to do it. So yeah, overall the story is kind of a lost cause, but that's not really what this game is about. If you're going back to play it today, you probably care most about the gameplay anyways, so let's get into that. One of the core elements of gameplay in TimeShift is the aforementioned time traveling suit, which allows you to slow time down, stop time completely, or rewind time briefly. The rewind feature is really only useful for a few puzzles that you'll find throughout the game, or if you get a grenade stuck to you. Yeah, this game has plasma grenades, basically. Time slow is probably what you'll be using most, as it uses the least amount of your meter and it gives you a useful edge in combat. Time stop is also useful for a few puzzles, as it allows you to walk through fire and electric currents, but it drains your meter much faster, so I only really used it in combat as a last resort. I honestly had a lot of fun with the time control abilities. I never felt too overpowered, but the powers definitely help when the game throws an assload of guys at you with limited cover, which I would normally look at as faulty game design, but with the addition of time control, it works out pretty well, and makes you feel pretty damn cool. The actual shooting is another area that I thought was executed nicely. It's very simple, with a limited number of weapons to choose from and enemies with fairly basic seeming AI, but it's surprisingly intense and fun. You'll start out with basic weapons like the assault rifle and shotgun, but even these are a lot of fun to use and they pack quite a punch. The sound effects for the weapons are great, and the way enemies react to getting shot at provides a layer of complexity to the relatively simple combat. And that's not to mention the implementation of time control abilities within combat. Later on, you'll gain access to a few more interesting weapons, like this cannon that shoots orange stuff, and a crossbow that shoots explosives that stick to enemies. All of the weapons are fun to use and work well in combat, despite there not being many of them to choose from. Similarly, there aren't many enemy types you'll be facing off against. In fact, you'll pretty much be fighting the same soldier guys the whole time. But honestly, I didn't have much of a problem with this, just because they're fun to fight, and continue to provide a challenge throughout the duration of the game. The only other enemies that I remember are these guys you fight a couple of times that have time powers like the player. It's a nice change of pace, but honestly you can just use time stop to kill them all pretty easily. There's also this thing that looks like a Roomba with a turret on top, which seems like a decent idea if you ask me. Not sure about the logistics of it though. Like I said before, the enemies don't exactly seem like geniuses or anything, but at least they know how to take cover. And they can still provide a decent challenge due to their number. It's fun to play around with your time abilities and the various weapons, and I never found myself getting bored of the combat despite the lack of enemy variety. Also, as I said before, the shooting feels really intense, which always adds to the fun of an enemy encounter, even if the enemies aren't terribly interesting themselves. I also want to mention the level design, which I actually like a lot. This is undoubtedly a linear game, but I'm a big fan of how open the areas feel despite the presence of a linear path. This actually kind of reminds me of something like the earlier Halo games, oddly enough, where you have a fairly obvious path, but a large space to traverse through to get there. I just can't say that. But you know what I mean, right? This isn't necessarily the case all the time in TimeShift, as a good portion of the levels take place in more enclosed areas and tighter spaces in general. But the few instances where you're given a vehicle or a larger area to explore stuck out to me. And that's about all I have to say about TimeShift. I know that this review was a little bit on the shorter side, but I didn't think this game really necessitated like a 4-hour review or deep plot dive or anything like that. Personally, I do see this game as a bit of an Xbox 360 hidden gem. It's got a certain nostalgia to it for me, just because of the time it came out, the graphics and stuff like that. It also doesn't hurt that I remember playing the demo as a kid, and damn, I was too young to be playing this shit. If you're like me at all and you're a fan of slightly janky old 360 or PS3 games, I think you'll feel right at home with TimeShift. It's not in my top games of all time or anything like that, but it's enjoyable nonetheless, and they really don't make games like this anymore. Before I get out of your hair and I still have your precious attention, I'd like to go ahead and plug a few things if that's alright, even though you don't really have a choice because this is my review in my video. First off, I want to thank everyone who checked out my comic dub for Batman Year One. It means a lot to me, and I am planning on doing more stuff like that in the future, so I hope you liked it. And if you've seen that video, you likely are aware that I've been dabbling in a bit of voice acting recently, which has been a lot of fun. And I've even got a few projects that I've done voices for already. And I'd like to shout a few of them out here, if that's alright. Check out the YouTube channel Apex Films for some badass GTA 5 machinima content. And if you want to hear my voice in one of them, check out their most recent machinima, Batman the Series. It's honestly fantastic, and I provided the voice for Governor Hill. Next, check out the YouTube channel ML Legend Comics for some great comic dubs. We're currently dubbing the webtoon Wayne Family Adventures, in which I am voicing Alfred. And we got more stuff on the way, so be sure to subscribe. Last for today, check out Eddie Soria VA on YouTube for his original audio series Dragon Ball Chapter Black, in which I am voicing Adult Gohan and Gohan Black. And if you want to contact me to record any kind of voiceover for your project, I've got an email in the description that you can use to contact me, and I've got a demo reel on my channel if you want an idea of my range. Alright, if you've made it this far, I've got to say thank you for checking me out and giving this video a chance. If you want to see more stuff like this, subscribing would mean a lot. I mean, we're so close to 50, so you could be the 50th person if you want. That would be sick. Leaving a like or comment on this video also helps a great deal, and I would greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you when I see you. Bye.